Hello. I am going to give a little talk here on Palm Sunday, a historical perspective. I will begin with quoting Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. The more I learn about Jesus, I have a deeper understanding of how he changed the world. He was compassionate. He was a leader for a more just world. He was fearless. He saw the intertwining of his life and whatever may lie beyond this life, knowing that the actions of this life matter for what might come after, a spiritual life to be lived now in the present moment. How we define our lives in this world on earth is of extreme importance. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, it says in the Bible. Wherever heaven may be and whatever it may contain, Jesus suggested to only look at how we live our lives in the here and now. Jesus cared for the marginalized. He cared for the ill. He cared for the forgotten and the homeless in his lifetime on earth. He couldn't help but look at power structures in everyday life. How did the forgotten become forgotten? How did the marginalized become marginalized? Because of the actions he had done leading up to Palm Sunday, in the questioning of power dynamics, particularly with Rome, Jesus was a threat to the Roman Empire as he saw who held power and who used it to suppress the marginalized and the forgotten. More equality was not what the Roman Empire wanted. Many had been healers, many had been called the Messiah before Jesus, but it was Jesus that was recognized by a critical mass to be the Messiah, to be King of the Jews, after Herod's own failed attempt at being King of the Jews, which Herod was working side by side with the Roman government. Jesus knew that his act of riding on a donkey, albeit coming in peace in the season of Passover, would be seen as treasonous by the Roman Empire. It was a grand political act against the status quo politics of Caesar and Pilate. By accounts, it didn't seem as though Jesus wanted to die, but he was willing to deal with the consequences of his actions in defending the poor, in defending the disenfranchised, and in defending those who had been subjected to cruelty by the Roman Empire, decade after decade, the violence and despair, century after century. The peace that Jesus promoted had ramifications. The act of peace led to his crucifixion. That peace led to the Roman government responding with an act of force. Power doesn't like peace and equality. Power will fight wars and crucify people, saying it is all for a broader peace. But what it does is that it keeps power structures in place and maneuvers them in hopes of getting more power and to maintain status quo at a minimum. Senseless gun violence continues in the United States, and I say senseless because we are the only democracy in the world that has had a gun ratio of 120 guns for every 100 humans. For some comparison and context, Yemen has 62 guns for every 100 people, just behind the U.S. Canada has 35 for every 100 people. New Zealand has 26 for every 100. Italy has 14. And we have had a Congress over the decades and a court system that continually backs the ability for these numbers to exist in this country. We have a response within a culture where when there is gun violence in society, we as a country have historically responded by buying more guns. It seems completely illogical. And there is nothing sacred or spiritual about adding guns to our society or supporting laws and policy that make our communities more violent. Logic suggests that the less guns there are in society, the less violence will occur, especially when so many have access that anyone who is triggered to kill can easily do so. This is one reason why we have a national campaign within Unitarian Universalism called You the Vote. We must vote our values in society and then live out those values individually and collectively. The momentum must be in our neighborhoods to find people who will want to hold the gun lobby accountable. And then once elected, make sure that gun laws are enforced so that our communities can be more safe. The gun lobby, I would say, is the enemy of peace. And if we want to contemplate what would Jesus do, the acronym WWJD, I think it is safe to say he would see the gun lobby as a threat to society, as he saw the Roman Empire to be at the time. The gun lobby represents the industrial war complex that Eisenhower warned citizens of in his last presidential address in the 1960s. And I'm going to share that. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is the new American experience, Eisenhower said. He goes on, the total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of federal government. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. So that's what he said so many decades ago. We now have a political culture where Congress pockets money from gun lobbyists, taking blood money while trying to convince citizens that having everyone in the country owning a gun is the safest thing that can happen. And at that time, in the time and still of atomic bombs, of our aerospace industry and drones. And the idea that humans can go to a revolution of overthrowing a government with force of guns is outdated, literally and figuratively. But when a society of angry and bitter people with guns who seek perceived existential threats with vengeance, street violence can increase, domestic violence can increase, and children die. Policy accountability and the promise of democracy and a culture of nonviolence are the benchmarks we need to strive for as a society that wants to transcend the violence of this world. Jesus could not be bought by power. He could not be tamed in his passion to help the poor, to help the marginalized and the traumatized of society. Jesus was willing to do treasonous acts against the Roman government of Caesar. The common ramification for this treasonous act against the Roman Empire government was crucifixion. Before crucifixion occurred, the Last Supper occurred, a Passover dinner with those closest to him. We only need to look at Jesus on Palm Sunday to see he walked in the city without a sword, without riding on a running horse, but a slow-paced donkey, a symbol of peace over the war horses of the time, and that people were willing to rise up behind him on principle, on deeds that said their children and the wish for their communities to live in peace was worth standing up in unison with each other against the Roman government. They said, enough is enough. We won't allow you to continue to ravage and level our communities. We wish for peace, and we will follow Jesus until the peace we seek becomes true. If we follow the deeds of Jesus to help our communities live a free life, free from being in constant fear of tyranny and violence, we can be part of a community that seeks peace and love. Jesus died for this cause so that others would not have to. His followers believed that they had a leader that truly had their best interest at heart, saying, we will stand behind him, whatever the cost might be, because we believe in a promise that lies beyond the hells the Roman government has put our children and families under. In the time of the Roman army, there were no guns or atomic bombs, but there were bloody, oppressive wars. The Romans used armor cavalry harnesses at the time and horned saddles and spears instead. Jesus did not use any symbology of weapons of war when riding in on his donkey. His defense was his message, his love for his people, his wish to alleviate suffering for all, and he died for that cause. Jesus would see weapons of mass destruction, assault rifles, and other forms of war as a Roman tactic. Jesus would have seen the scapegoating and pain put upon our trans community on the side of the Romans. Jesus would have seen anything as escalating violence on the side of the Romans. He would have seen anything of increasing power on the side of the Romans. He would love our children and do everything possible to make sure year after year after year, where children are killed in the schools by guns and where politics and policies and rule of law making a gun easier and easier, he would work to see that children were protected with love and that the Roman Empire would be pressured to lay their guns down to the ground, not through more violence, but through more love. He rode in on his donkey in the name of peace and died for all who would follow in his love and beliefs. Jesus on Palm Sunday gives us the promise of peace, the promise of better days ahead, not in an afterlife, but this life that will guide in all the days ahead. As thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Garrison Keillor said, Palm Sunday, when Jesus rode in to Jerusalem, was greeted with applause and with palms. People thought he had come to overthrow the Romans, but no, he had come to change them, and that led to things turning bad. Jesus did not organize any army, although he might have had the ability to. He came only to the threat of his own life that was placed upon him, not of his followers. as he did not want bloodshed put upon his followers. There was not a revolution in the ordinary sense that week, but the seeds of a spiritual revolution were being planted, and one that began to question power. Who had it, and who was being unfairly subjected to it? We do what we do in the work of justice, not waiting for an afterlife, but we do that every day by our actions and our words, so that we live out the promise that Martin Luther King Jr. said. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Confronting injustice is the only way to have the promise of justice. Confronting evil acts of hatred and bigotry is the only way to ensure the work of peace. Peace is an act, hence a verb, but we talk about it sometimes as if an end result without focusing on the verb. The actions that produce peace. What actions must be taken right now to produce peace in the world, to produce peace for the children of this earth? We do the work of peace. We act in peace. Peace is only a result due to actions, not necessarily a noun or end result. We keep working for peace to ensure peace's survival. Jesus knew that and showed the way for those who would choose to follow him. That is the promise of a life away from violence, away from hatred, away from fear. Hope for a better tomorrow, not by standing on the sidelines, but to actively engage. The promise of what loving thy neighbor offers. The promise that peace offers. The promise that democracy of justice and equality offer. Promise that there is a spiritual life worth living that is above the phrase of the standard us versus them politics. The promise that our children will no longer be pawns for the gun lobby and the industrial military complex. The promise that earth can be renewed with love and care. The promise that each person in this life is worthy and whole and free from trauma, so that we can manifest that peace that we hold within ourselves and manifest that peace out into the rest of the world. May it be so, and amen.